The stars above Colony 7 shone as calm and silent as ever, but down below, nothing was calm anymore. The colony's quiet night was broken by a single, coded alert that pulsed red on every screen in the command hub, a ship carrying over 24 human children had gone missing on its way to a peaceful galactic exchange program. The signal cut out midway through the journey, and what followed was silence. No comms, no tracking, no emergency beacon, and no answers, Commander. Ross stood at the front of the room, arms behind his back, watching the last image of the transport ship freeze on the screen. It showed a formation of strange vessels flanking the human craft, their design unmistakable, narrow needle-like hulls with glowing amber engines. This was not random. These were Vari ships, old enemies turned trade partners who had supposedly made peace with Earth a decade ago, but now the pattern was familiar and the message was clear. This was not an accident. This was a message at his side. Stood Agent Lane, recently recalled to duty after a quiet year spent training cadets, his face calm, but his eyes full of storm. He had seen this kind of thing before, not with children, but with diplomats, mining crew, scientific teams. They vanished. And nothing ever came back, not even wreckage. Now, it was different this time. It was children. This time Earth would not stay quiet. The room filled with hushed voices as data analysts confirmed the signal loss was deliberate. Jamming layers had been used, systems overridden, and then the ship rerouted away from all standard lanes, all done within minutes. Whoever did this had planned it down to the second. Ross didn't speak for a while, then he turned toward the room and asked the only question that mattered: who did this and why? Silence followed until Lane stepped forward and dropped a small black data chip on the table. "This isn't the first time," he said, quiet, "but certain we've seen fragments of movement near the Vari Rim, multiple trade ships with altered manifests. The crew lists are always clean, but there's always one thing missing: cargo records. I pulled data from the last 6 months. It's not just us. The Vari have been moving live cargo, no declaration, no permits, and now we've lost our children across the galaxy." The Galactic Council met in virtual space, their holograms glowing over the council chamber. Earth representatives pushed for immediate action, sanctions, open investigation, search and rescue, but most species hesitated, citing the need for proof, diplomacy, balance of peace. The usual words that sounded noble but meant delay, stalling until the noise faded. But Earth was not in the mood to wait. Families were crying on every screen. Protests erupted across cities. Every station broadcasted the faces of the missing children, small smiles frozen in their last pictures. Their names echoed across the networks. Back at the colony, Ross stood in a silent room watching the footage loop. The Vari had crossed a line they could never uncross. He had heard people whisper that humans were dangerous, that they were born of a death world, that their instincts were too sharp, their reactions too fast, and now those whispers would become screams. Lane returned from an off-world intel drop and placed a small drone on the table. The drone clicked to life and played a recording, a blurry shot from a pirate informant in a lawless sector. The image showed one child locked behind a shimmering cage, too frightened to speak. The caption was coded, but it translated into 3 words: "Ark's reach confirmed." Ross didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. The room grew colder, even without temperature controls. This was the proof Earth needed, not for the Council, but for themselves. They had their target, they had a location, and they had their reason. Earth would no longer wait for permission. Earth would act. Lane sat down beside a long steel crate, unlatched it, and pulled out a sealed case marked in black protocol. Dustfall was printed in plain bold letters. He didn't open it yet, but everyone in the room knew what it meant. It was not a rescue mission. It was not a diplomatic move. It was a response, sharp and final. Some officers in the room looked uneasy, not because they disagreed, but because they knew what was coming. Earth had always warned the galaxy that while humans could be kind and patient and forgiving, there was a second side to them, a part that emerged only when something precious was taken. And now that part was waking up back at Earth's main orbital station. Plans were drafted in silence, no fanfare, no announcements. Stealth ships were activated, quiet communications, encrypted, and redirected. Earth's eyes were now on Ark's reach. A hidden Vari facility deep in outlaw territory, outside council jurisdiction, and far from civilian channels. Children were somewhere in that place, and Earth would bring them back. But not just that, Earth would also bring the message that no one, not even the oldest species, no matter how powerful or secretive, could harm the young of humanity and expect to remain untouched. The families watched from home, unaware of the preparations, but something had shifted. They saw it in the way Earth's leaders no longer gave speeches, but held quiet, firm expressions. They saw it in the military fleets that no longer stayed docked the sky above. Earth was no longer just stars and silence. It was full of movement, quiet, but unstoppable, and somewhere far across the stars, in the cold, dark corners of space, the Vari watched from behind their cloaks of shadow, unaware that their actions had ignited something far beyond politics. They had touched something sacred. They had pulled the wrong thread. And now the whole galaxy was about to feel the force of a people born from Fire. Earth was not coming to negotiate. Earth was coming to collect its children and teach a lesson the galaxy would never forget. Inside the silent walls of Earth's ore command, the air was tight and tense. The light hum of data terminals filled the space. But no one spoke without purpose. Every breath, every click meant movement forward toward something bigger, darker, and more final than most of them had ever faced. The video of the child trapped inside the Vari cage played again, this time slower. Every detail was studied, the background, the symbols on the wall, the lighting patterns. Nothing was ignored. Agent Lane moved between consoles, silently checking feeds and encrypted messages, his expression unreadable, his thoughts already deep in the outer zones, far from Earth, far from the council, far from politics. His mind was on the location called Ark's Reach and the many things that name had once meant to criminals, traitors, warlords, and now to the kidnapped children whose lives were hanging in darkness. While the stars above continued their silent spin across the galaxy, the Vari sent out their public message, smooth words dressed in layers of excuses. They denied everything, accused Earth of spreading false rumors and manipulating footage. They said pirates had become bolder recently, and Earth should look closer to its own enemies, not to them. The council nodded at the words and promised to investigate, but made no action, no call to arms, no urgency in their tone. Humanity watched it unfold and saw clearly what it had seen many times before. They knew what silence meant. Silence was a shield for cowards, a mask for guilt, and a tool for those who believed Earth would hesitate. The problem was the Vari had not been paying attention. They had forgotten what humans did when silence replaced justice. Back on the surface, Commander Ross walked through the lower halls of the intelligence wing, where a separate team was working without interruption or oversight. These were not soldiers bound by regular orders. They were planners, operators, tacticians, whose work existed only in rumors. To most, Ross entered without knocking and laid the drone footage on the central table. The room studied it in silence. Then the lead strategist turned toward him and nodded once. The protocol would proceed. Meanwhile, Lane prepared for launch, his gear packed without a checklist, his weapon calibrated by hand, not by machine. He carried no badge, no rank, nothing that could be traced if captured. He wore black, lightweight armor with a deep blue stripe across the chest, a color only a few recognized. Those who did never forgot it. His team was small, but built for the task. One was a signal hacker, raised in the outer colonies where tech was scarce, but instincts sharp. Another was an infiltration expert, who could move through enemy walls without ever being seen. The third was a medic who had served in the wars before peace. Came the fourth, a heavy assault specialist who spoke little, but whose loyalty was complete. They boarded a silent runner ship built for speed and cloaked movement. No launch ceremony, no farewell, just a quiet release from the dock and a blink into darkness. Once gone, their route disappeared from Earth systems completely. Even their tracking codes self-erased as the ship entered dead space. Inside the ship, Lane sat still, reviewing the mission plan for the 10th time. They had one shot: find Ark's Reach, confirm the presence of the children, extract as many as possible, and if confirmed that the Vari were behind it, leave a beacon behind. A message to be picked up later, not a distress signal, but a statement, something the stars would carry, something that would echo louder than council speeches far away within the sealed chambers of Ark's Reach. The children sat behind energy walls. Small groups kept apart, their voices low, their movements watched. They were not harmed, but the fear around them was heavy. They had stopped asking questions days ago. They only held on to small memories. One child kept a broken necklace, another, a folded paper star made on the ship before capture. They didn't know where they were, or why, only that something had gone terribly wrong. One child tried to remember her mother's face, but it was fading. She hummed a song, instead the others joined. Quietly, the sound soft but clear, and somewhere beyond the wall, a Vari guard paused, listening, but said nothing. The Vari inside Ark's Reach were not soldiers. They were part of something older, a network of trade and experimentation that thrived. In shadows and secrets, they believed they were safe. They believed the Council would never let Earth act alone, and they believed their fear of humans gave them reason to strike first, before humans grew stronger, before human children grew into something they could not control. Back on Earth, the public tension grew. News of the silence spread faster than any official updates. People began holding vigils, not just for the missing, but for what they feared might be coming. Many still remembered the older wars not long past, when Earth had first stepped into space and made itself known, not with diplomacy, but with defiance. They remembered the warnings sent to other species after the first attack on human colonists. They remembered that Earth never struck first, but when it did, it never struck twice. Ross stood before a quiet screen, watching the route of the black ship vanish into the noise of deep space. A message flashed across the top, silent but clear, dustfall in motion below. That a timer counted upward, not down. The president made no public speech, only a recorded message broadcast. Once, without warning, she spoke calmly, without anger, without threats, only facts. Earth's children had been taken, and no action was taken. By those in power, Earth would act without their permission. If that made Earth dangerous, then the galaxy could decide for itself. In the black silence of the runner ship, Lane watched Ark's Reach come into view, surrounded by asteroid debris and hidden defense systems, but he smiled quietly as their cloak held firm. The galaxy had slept too long under the illusion of safety. It had forgotten that Earth was not peaceful by design, only by choice. And now that choice had been taken from them. Inside Ark's Reach, a soft alarm pulsed, unnoticed at first, then flashing red just once before dying. The human ship had entered range without being seen, and the shadows inside the stronghold began to shift. But it was already too late. Ark's Reach sat hidden behind fractured asteroids and cold static fields, its location never logged in star charts, its routes erased by Syndicate engineers. The outer hull appeared abandoned and rusted, its signal faint and irregular, but all of it was a lie beneath. The silent shell lay corridors thick with security guards and scanners, corridors filled with secrets and cages and whispers that were never meant to escape. The human infiltration ship drifted silently within the shadow of a dead rock, its engines cooled near freezing, its lights off, its systems masked by software older than the war itself. Inside the ship, Lane watched the rotating scan patterns carefully, eyes fixed on timing, speed, and distance. His team stayed wordless behind him, each of them focused not on fear, but on precision. One misstep meant failure, and failure here was not an option when the timing lined up. Lane gave a single nod. The ship dropped a beacon, disguised as debris, drifting slowly toward the outer ring, and then the infiltration began. Their suits absorbed sound. Their heat signatures were masked, their movements practiced. They landed on the outer service port without alerting a single alarm. One by one, they entered the dark hatch and disappeared into the kill belly of the enemy. Inside the walls of Ark's Reach, the children still waited, without knowing how close freedom was coming. The guards outside their cells had grown quieter, more cautious, not out of fear of the children, but because they knew what they were holding. The Vari knew human minds grew sharp under pressure. They knew human instinct did not break, it adapted, even in children. One Boy had stopped crying days ago. Now he watched everything, the steps of the guards, the way the doors locked, the codes they used without understanding the symbols. He memorized them. Something inside him had shifted. A quiet resolve forming deep within him, the kind that adults often ignored until it was too late. Lane's team reached the lower levels without detection, following vent paths and silent drops between security fields. The map was old but mostly accurate, and soon they found the first checkpoint, a hallway guarded by two armed Vari. Lane signaled to the team. The heavy specialist moved forward. Fast and brutal, his weapon made no sound, only motion. Both guards dropped before they saw anything. The hallway stayed quiet. Lane moved on, no emotion on his face, only purpose. They found the cells 10 minutes later. The room was dim, the walls buzzing with faint energy. The children inside didn't react at first until Lane stepped forward, lowered his helmet, and knelt down. His voice was soft but clear. "We're here to take you home." Silence broke. The children stared, then one reached out slowly, touched his glove, and began to cry, not from fear, but from something older, from the hope that had nearly died inside her, and now returned like fire. One by one, they moved toward the gate. Lane's tech expert cracked the energy lock with a device small enough to fit in a palm. The door slid open, and for a moment, the world stopped moving. But Ark's Reach was not sleeping anymore. The guards at the upper levels had found the dead patrol. The alarms began, their low hum spreading like a wave across the facility. Lane didn't flinch. He turned to the medic. "Carry the small ones heavy. Stay behind. Cover tech. Seal our path behind." US move. The team shifted instantly. Practice smooth, efficient. Lane took the lead, clearing the path ahead with the precision of someone who had lived through fire before. He didn't waste a single step, didn't use unnecessary force, but left nothing behind that could follow. As they moved upward through the inner corridors, a strange figure emerged, not a soldier, but a scientist. Pale robes, black eyes, holding a scanner. Trembling, he raised his hands and spoke in the common trade language. "You do not understand what these children are. You are saving something you will regret." Lane didn't stop. He raised his weapon and spoke back without hesitation. "You took what wasn't yours. You crossed a line. There's no coming back from that." The scientist shouted again. "They are not like others. They survive things. No species, should they remember pain, they grow stronger from fear. They are dangerous, not because of what they do, but because of what they will become." Lane paused for only a moment, then walked past him without another word. The team behind him knew the truth, not as theory, but as lived experience. Humanity was not dangerous because it hated humanity, was dangerous because it endured no matter the cost. Outside the facility, Earth's signal drone had activated. It sent a narrow beam message to orbit, encrypted and tight. The fleet had received confirmation. Children alive. Facility located. Threat confirmed. Action required. No more debate. Commander Ross stood aboard the lead vessel of the Earth response wing, his hands folded behind his back, his voice calm as he gave the final order. "Begin operation." Response. The fleet moved at once. Silent engines burned toward Ark's Reach, not to open talks, but to make history. Lane and the children reached the extraction point, where their ship hovered, cloaked behind debris. As the children boarded one by one, Lane stood at the hatch watching for movement. He knew what was coming. The Vari would not let them go easily. He turned to his team. "We hold until the last child is aboard, no matter what." The first wave of Vari guards poured into the corridor behind them, energy rifles raised. But the heavy specialist stood firm, shield extended, weapon ready, covering the exit with unshaken resolve. The medic passed children forward, without pause, guiding them with calm words. The hacker stood beside Lane, setting charges on the last door just in case. The last child stepped into the ship. Lane followed and sealed the hatch, then turned to the control pad and sent a final signal. One short phrase burned into every system in Ark's Reach. Earth remembers. The ship vanished into the stars. Just as Earth's warships came into range, the facility's defenses powered up. But too late, the first human strike hit with the force of a worldquake, smashing through shields with kinetic force and orbital fire. Ark's Reach shook with impact, the walls breaking, the alarms turning into screams. Earth had not sent a warning, it had sent a judgment, one earned through silence and sealed by the cries of stolen children. The skies above Ark's reach burned with light as the first wave of Earth's retaliation fell like thunder from orbit. There was no speech, no demand, no message sent ahead, only force, raw and calculated, unleashed without hesitation. Earth's fleet moved in silent coordination, warships emerging from cloak and formation. Each weapon activated, each target marked. The Vari defenders scrambled to respond, but their systems were not made for this kind of storm. They had believed Earth would pause, negotiate, perhaps threaten, but never strike without delay. Now that mistake was carved into the metal of their ships as explosions lit the darkness around the stronghold. Commander Ross watched from the command deck of the Earth vessel named Resolve. His eyes never blinked as reports came in, enemy shields collapsing, Vari support ships falling into disarray, planetary defense systems failing in waves. His voice remained calm, steady, no celebration in his tone. No cruelty, only focus. He understood what was happening. He knew history was shifting beneath them. A single act of violence had started it, but silence had confirmed it. Now the response was not war, it was balance restored through fire. Inside Ark's reach, chaos ruled the corridors, once cold and ordered, now flooded with smoke and panic. Doors failed, lights blinked, alarms screamed in all directions. The scientists fled toward escape pods only to find them disabled. One guard tried to call for help on an old frequency, only to hear static, replaced by a single repeating signal. It was not a distress call, it was Earth's anthem rewritten into a pulsing code. That meant we are here, and we are not leaving above the surface. Earth's dropships began their descent, not slow and tactical but fast and direct. Striking into the heart of the facility with precision, human soldiers stepped into the broken halls. With armor sealed and visors glowing, they did not speak, they did not hesitate, they moved like shadows through fire. Their weapons spoke only when needed, each shot counted, each step chosen, nothing wasted, no mercy offered. The Vari defenders who remained were confused, not just by the strength of the attack, but by the quiet fury behind it. They had seen many species fight before, some with pride, some with rage, some with desperation. But humans fought with memory, with something deep and unmoving inside them, not hatred, but something colder, the kind of force that only awakens when something sacred is. Stolen Lane stood aboard the extraction ship, watching the battle unfold from above. The children were safe now, being treated on the medical deck, resting, eating, sleeping for the first time in days, some still afraid, some too tired to understand what had happened, but all alive and all going home. Lane remained quiet, staring through the glass as Ark's reach began to break apart piece by piece, the charges they had left inside, now igniting in sequence. His hand rested on the frame, not in anger, but in quiet farewell to a place that had crossed a line it should never have approached. On Earth, news spread fast, images of the children returning filled every screen. Families reunited, hospitals filled with tears, not from pain but from relief. The world stopped for a moment to watch, not out of fear but pride. They saw what had been done in their name, and they did not weep for the enemy. They stood together across cities and continents, silent as they watched the message unfold across stars. This is what happens when you take from us. The Galactic Council held emergency talks. Words flew in every direction. Some called Earth dangerous, reckless, uncontrollable. Others said Earth had done what was necessary, what others were too afraid to do. One voice tried to condemn Earth officially, but the vote never passed, not because of politics, but because of silence. Every species watching knew one truth: the line had been crossed, and Earth had drawn it back in fire. Ross received the council message on his personal terminal, a request for dialogue, an inquiry into the incident, an offer for peaceful talks. He closed the message. Without replying, his ship turned away from the remains of Ark's reach engines. Steady course set for home behind him. The last structures of the Vari facility crumbled into ash and void. The Vari, who remained across the galaxy, began to vanish. Not by attack, but by shame. Their allies withdrew, their trade collapsed, their influence ended. They had awakened something they could never control, not just in humans, But in every species that had watched and understood the cost of silence, Earth had not started a war, it had ended one that had been hiding under diplomacy for too long. Inside a quiet room on the Resolve, Ross stood alone beside a terminal screen showing a group of children laughing softly, one of them drawing with crayons, another holding a toy given by a medic. None of them knew what war had raged around them. None of them understood how close they had come to being forgotten, and none of them needed to know. Ross watched them and felt nothing but certainty. They had done what had to be done, and they had done it without apology. The fleet returned to Earth, not in victory, but in completion. There were no parades, no medals, no speeches, only a quiet landing, families waiting with open arms, soldiers stepping off with tired eyes and clean armor, not proud, but sure they had done what others could not, and in doing so they reminded the galaxy that peace was not weakness and mercy had limits. From orbit, Earth looked unchanged, but every ship, every eye, every heart on the surface knew that something had shifted, not in the stars, but in the silence between them, where trust had once lived and where now stood a warning, not of power but of principle. Do not cross the line again. The sky above Earth was calm again. No smoke, no sirens, no ships breaking through clouds, only quiet drifting light, and the slow, peaceful return of stars. Once hidden behind war, the cities below had returned to motion. People walking streets, returning to homes, returning to lives, but something deep in their hearts had changed, not in fear, not in rage, but in awareness. A silent truth had taken root that Earth was no longer a newcomer to the stars. It was now something more, something known, something remembered. In hospitals across the colony's children laughed again, their voices rising into halls that had heard only grief for too long. Doctors moved between beds. Parents sat beside blankets, warm with life, soft toys, held close, eyes watching with quiet tears, not of sorrow, but of thankfulness. One child whispered stories of corridors and strange lights, but ended with smiles and drawings of the heroes who came through fire to bring them home. These were not tales of pain, they were stories of survival shaped by hope, rebuilt by courage. Lane visited one of those clinics. He didn't speak much, his eyes moving from bed to bed, watching the children sleep, watching the strength they carried, without knowing how heavy it truly was. A nurse tried to thank him, but he only nodded, then stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, where silence welcomed him like an old friend. He stood there with hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon, as if waiting for something, or maybe remembering something that no one else would ever understand. Ross stood before a screen in the command hall, not one of battle, not one of plans. This screen showed a single name now etched into the galactic archive: Arcs. Reach marked as destroyed, classified as a former illegal facility, and beside it a red tag placed by Earth's authority: status irreversible. The Council had not removed it. No one had the will. No one dared. The line was drawn and sealed in record forever, not as a threat, not as pride, but as proof. The Vari presence across the stars faded in weeks. Their embassies shut down, their trade lanes empty, their leaders quiet. Even their allies stepped away, not because they had turned against them, but because they feared the echo left behind. They had seen what it meant to test the patience of a death world. They had seen what Earth did when pushed past silence, and they did not want to stand in the way. If it ever happened again across neutral systems, alien parents began holding their children closer. Not in fear of Earth, but in understanding of it. They began to see humans, not just as unpredictable, not just as survivors, but as protectors, as creatures who built homes with fire in their blood and hearts that bled only when something truly precious was taken from them. Stories spread in whispers through space stations and travelers' tavern, stories of a people who had come from a world where storms never rested, where beasts never bowed, and where love meant fighting until the last breath. For those who could not fight back in the council chambers, words were softer, now measured not in noise, but in weight. Every ambassador spoke with care when addressing Earth's name, not because of threat, but because of recognition. Earth had moved from new member to something older, something ancient, not by years, but by action, by principle, by memory shaped through flame lane. Sat one evening outside an old station dock where the lights flickered and the air carried the scent of oil and rust. Beside him sat the heavy specialist who had stood at the gates of Arcs. Reach both silent, both still until the specialist finally spoke. You think it's over. Lane looked up into the sky where the stars blinked slowly, then shook his head. Nothing's ever over, but maybe now they'll think twice before testing the fire again, somewhere on Earth. A statue was raised, not of a soldier, not of a leader, but of a group of children holding hands, standing together, eyes forward, simple, strong, carved in stone. Beneath it, a single sentence was written: "We came for them, and we always will." Families walked past it, sometimes silent, sometimes telling stories about what happened, not all the details, but just enough to remind the next generation that safety is not given. It is earned. It is protected by those who choose to stand when others step back. Ross returned to the colony. Once marked by sorrow, now filled with joy, he walked through streets where people smiled again, where children ran with laughter, not weighed down by fear. He passed a school where new walls had been built, strong and bright, filled with books and voices and futures untouched by chains. He stopped for a moment, watching through a window as a teacher explained the stars, and one child raised his hand and said, "My brother came back from one of those stars, and now he wants to be a pilot." Ross smiled, then walked on, not as a commander, not as a warrior, just as a man who had seen darkness and chosen to carry light back with him. Final report filed in Earth's records was brief. It did not speak of tactics or victories. It simply read Arcs. Reach eliminated children, returned threat, answered line, defended, mission complete, and far beyond the systems where humans lived, far in the corners of known space, where whispers held more truth than broadcasts, a message began to spread, not spoken, loudly but shared from ear to ear, from mind to mind. The humans do not start fights, but if you harm their young, they will end you completely. That message was never written in law, never voted on in council, never declared on stage, but it burned into the history of the stars, just like Arc's reach burned into ash and memory. Earth was not feared, it was respected, not because it was strong, but because it chose carefully when to show that strength. And when it did, never left anything unfinished. And so the galaxy moved forward, changed by one choice, shaped by one action, made clear by one truth. Never crossed the line again. The end.